is it iwi? I've got a quote from you saying, to quote, a lot of them are saying all these kids are in care, all these people are in jail. What's the iwi doing about that? My response is your system put them in there, your system needs to pay for it. You want to sort of explain that for us?
Well, you know, they've had 170 odd years of it, and we've just been settled last year, and they want us to fix it? Get a life? Geez. You know, the mess that our stats are in, I would love to be able to throw all of our resources at it and help our people on our terms with our rules and regulations. But the fact of the matter is that's not going to happen. And yet, for the taxpayer to expect us to turn and put our resources, minimal in comparison to what was taken, back into the system to help our people, that's not going to help our people at all. And I think one of the issues that we've got is brokerage. I'm not completely convinced that there is enough brokerage for our people to go in and be accessing all that is on the mainstream entitlement system. I'm not too sure if we're actually accessing that as well as we could be.
We are totally not, is the short answer to that.
And there's all sorts of gateways why we're not. We need to break those gateways and block those blockages, and actually get our people to access what is their entitlement now. What is any person living in this country who's a citizen is their right.
Marmity, and yet we often hear, is it the government's or iwi's job, we often hear about the value of iwi-led justice programs, including but not limited to restorative justice, marae-based justice principles. Isn't that part of Māori taking ownership of the problems?
We need room. This isn't an either-or, right? Māori agency is also part of how the government should function, or it should be. And I've said this in public before, but, you know, Justice Joe Williams said a very powerful thing in 2011 with the release of the Y262 report when he said the Crown is also Māori, right? And by logic and extension of that, Māori are also the Crown. So, but that's all kind of at a high level, right? Understanding that Māori have agency and should exercise it, and they need to be exercising it in such a way that government takes note and government is also enacting that is one thing. But again, I come back to this question of what's happening on the ground. How easy is it? And Piri just made the really important point. How are we managing to ensure that we're getting what we need and what we're entitled to from the system as it already exists? To what extent is the person who walks into the WINS office being heard, being understood by the case manager, for example? So that's just in the social welfare context, and the same thing in the criminal justice context. And so relationships, relationalism, if you like, is absolutely key to ensuring that Māori are part of whatever happens, nothing about us without us.
Final response to that, Ella?
Look, it's been a real privilege, actually, to be part of this panel and to have this voice. And I'd like to finish on an optimistic note, because one could end up in a dark rabbit hole thinking about these issues from a Māori perspective. But one of the things I think we are doing really extraordinarily well as a country is having conversations. And they're not always pleasant, and sometimes they're bruising, but I would rather be living in a country that we can have those conversations than some of the other places around the world where Indigenous people have even less rights.
Well, someone says, Wallace, this discussion is fantastic. Clever, civil people making very important points. Can you keep going after 5 p.m? I don't think we can, but we are going to get you all back again. Māmara Stevens, Piri Te Tau, Maigarehu and Ella Henry.
Kia ora, everybody. Have a fabulous Waitangi Day, everybody.
Fantastic.
We will.
Make every day Waitangi Day.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, it's the year of delivery for Labour, and the Prime Minister vows from the treaty grounds to do more for Māori. Invited guest Don Brash speaks his mind. Te reo, he says, has no practical value for most New Zealanders. Treaty settlements won't bring prosperity to Māori, and positive discrimination is a flop too. The Waitangi Board Chair backs a ban on a controversial activist. Back here, a group of migrant Chinese workers can't celebrate Chinese New Year as they're tens of thousands of dollars out of pocket, victims of a scam. All that and more, but first, the news.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. The political debate has wrapped up at Waitangi this afternoon with minimal protest and a united front from MPs across the political spectrum. The leaders of every party had the opportunity to speak directly to the people of the North at the treaty grounds today. Our political reporter Joe Moyer is there.
The Prime Minister spoke from the veranda of the Marae, where 1 year ago she asked to be held to account. Jacinda Ardern noted the number of Māori going to prison has gone down and the number employed has gone up, but she stressed there is much more to be done. The National Party leader Simon Bridges agreed with Ms Ardern that this year needs to be one of delivery and promised any future relationship with Māori will be one of partnership. A lone protester briefly interrupted proceedings. However, the overall mood at Waitangi was warm and calm. From Waitangi, Joe Moyer.
And Don Brash's speech at Te Te Marae has gone ahead, but not without disruption. A small but vocal group of opponents arrived with a No Room for Racism banner to hear Dr Brash, who now fronts Hobson's Pledge, a group opposed to different rights for Indigenous people. About 100 people were in the political forum tent for the speech, but from the moment he started talking, people in the crowd tried to shout down the former National Party leader. His comments questioning the value of te reo Māori got the biggest reaction. The Australian Prime Minister is promising tens of millions of dollars to support flood-stricken residents in the northern Queensland city of Townsville. Scott Morrison has toured the city today, where there's been more torrential rain overnight, part of what's being described as a 1 in 100-year deluge. More than 1,000 people spent the night in evacuation centres. 2 men are also missing in the floodwaters. Mr Morrison met with affected residents and said federal help will be made available.
This operation now, this disaster, will move from the deluge to the recovery and the clean-up. And that is often even more difficult because it's day in, day out. Finding the toys that have been destroyed, the carpets that you have to rip up.
Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison. A large bushfire has broken out west of Wakefield in the Nelson region. Fire and Emergency says it was alerted just after 2 o'clock about smoke on Pigeon Valley Road. It says 3 helicopters and crews from Wakefield, Nelson, Appleby, Tasman and Brightwater are on the scene. The police have staff on standby in case any evacuations are needed. A judge in Hawke's Bay has defended sentencing a teenager murderer to life in prison for a minimum of 10 years, saying it will provide the public with necessary protection. 15-year-old Hami Hanara was sentenced in the High Court in Napier for murdering a Flaxmere man, Kelly Donner, in March last year. The court heard Hanara and 4 other youths were trying to break into a business when they stumbled upon Mr Donner and a fight broke out, leading to him being followed and stabbed to death. At the sentencing, Justice Churchman said the life sentence was not unjust, describing the murder as brutal. The Green Party is throwing its support behind proposed changes designed to reduce fish dumping. Fishermen could be required to land undersized fish instead of throwing them overboard. Critics of the current throwback system say it incentivises operators to dump vast quantities of dead fish, which threatens fish stocks. The Green Party's fisheries spokesperson Gareth Hughes says he would have preferred to see a more wide-ranging review of the sector, but the current one is a good start.
Ultimately, what we want to see is less fish dumped at sea. We want to see less small fish caught and returned back dead. Ultimately, this is in the fishing industry's interest as well.
Gareth Hughes says the missing piece of the puzzle is cameras on fishing boats, and delays in their introduction are unacceptable. A Hawaiian politician has introduced a bill which would ban the sale of cigarettes to anyone under the age of 100. The law, introduced by local Democratic Representative Richard Cregan, would effectively amount to a cigarette ban by 2024. Hawaii already has some of the toughest laws on cigarette sales, but Mr Cregan, who's an emergency doctor, believes more needs to be done to ban what his bill calls the deadliest artefact in human history. Currently in Hawaii, people must be 21 years old to buy cigarettes. It's 5 minutes past 5. On to sport now. The new Auckland Blues rugby coach, Leon McDonald, says the former All Black Ma'anonu is training his lights out ahead of 2019 team selections. The 36-year-old has taken a 12-month contract with the troubled Auckland Blues franchise after playing for Toulon in the French Championship for 3 years. Nonu's return and experience put him back into All Black contention, and McDonald says he's never looked better.
Yeah, Mar's a great professional, and I think he's really enjoyed coming back, and he's rubbing shoulders with some old mates. You know, him and Sonny got a really strong relationship, and it's really nice to see those guys back on the field together. And yeah, look, he's head down, bum up at him. He's working really hard, and he just wants to play well for the team, which is great.
Leon McDonald there. The Black Caps and White Ferns will mark Waitangi Day tomorrow by wearing shirts with Aotearoa on them in their 2020 double headers against India. The two teams will wear te reo versions of their uniform in tomorrow's opening games in Wellington and retain them for the second and third matches at Auckland on Friday and Hamilton on Sunday. The Black Caps previously wore the Aotearoa shirts in their 2015 one-day series in Zimbabwe in recognition of Māori Language Week. And the leaders Liverpool have faltered again in English football's Premier League title race, being held to a 1-1 draw by West Ham United. It means Liverpool now have a 3-point lead over Manchester City, but they will go top on goal difference if they beat Everton on Thursday. That's the news.
On Wednesday morning, RNZ National marks Waitangi Day with a live special. We'll bring you the politicians and the people. We'll have a bit of history for you, plus food and music, and we'll check in on the events around the country too. Join me, Colin Peacock, in the capital, and Mihi Narangi Forbes, who'll be live with us at Waitangi on Waitangi Day morning, here on RNZ National.
Funded through New Zealand On Air. Here's the short forecast from Met Service taking us to midnight tomorrow, Wednesday, Waitangi Day. Northland, fine apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers. Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty. Taupo and Taihape, mainly fine, but a period of afternoon or evening showers tomorrow. Waikato to Taranaki, that includes Taumaranui, fine today. Morning cloud and patchy coastal drizzle tomorrow, then a period of afternoon or evening showers with possible thunderstorms. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine today. Showers develop tomorrow, though. Whanganui to Wellington, also Waitangi, Marlborough and Nelson, fine spells. A period of showers tomorrow morning. Bulla to Fiordland, rain spreading north today, clearing from the south this afternoon through to tomorrow morning, and then mainly fine. Isolated showers tomorrow afternoon. For Canterbury, high cloud increasing, scattered rain developing this evening, gradually easing tomorrow, but remaining cloudy. Otago and Southland, patchy rain. That should clear up this afternoon about now. Then fine spells. Isolated showers for Southland and at the Chatham Islands. Cloudy periods with occasional light showers tomorrow. It's 8 minutes past 5.
You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ. In breaking news, emergency services are responding to a large bushfire in Pigeon Valley, Tasman. Police say they were called to the scene by fire and emergency at about 3:15 p.m. and are advising people in the area to be prepared to leave. Motorists are urged to avoid the area. We'll go to Waitangi shortly in the show, where the Prime Minister has vowed to do more for Māori. Don Brash, on the other hand, argued against what he called special treatment for Māori and positive discrimination that was in between the shouts of protesters. But first, a group of migrant Chinese workers say they have very little to celebrate on Chinese New Year after becoming victims of a scam. The men were recruited last year for construction jobs with guarantees of work, visas and a place to stay. Since their arrival, some haven't had a day's work, others say they've been made to sign new contracts, and all of them say they've been abandoned by the agent who charged them $45,000 and then disappeared. This in-depth video report by Alex Perrottet and Liu Chen.
Gao Li Dong came to New Zealand with a dream of earning enough money to properly support his family. He borrowed money and threw in his lot with a few colleagues on what they thought was a solid guarantee from a man named Peter or Wenshan Li.
I paid 43,000 New Zealand dollars to come over here. Peter Lee promised me that I would have work and earn money, and my visa would be extended to 3 years. Some of us got a 12-month visa, and some got a 36-month visa. We asked him why that was, saying as though we all paid the same amount of money. Peter Lee promised my 1-year visa would be extended once we arrived here. Now, he just left us here with NPL. He's not picking up our call or replying to our messages.
NPL is National Personnel Limited. Its website explains it's the brainchild of brothers Kevin and Peter O'Connor. It finds contractors for construction companies. The O'Connor brothers also set up Pultama Training Institute, which offered basic construction training for cadets, but after cadets complained they were conned and had to sign loan agreements, the NZQA launched an inquiry. The institute is now no longer in business. The 50 or so Chinese workers say their initial visas were all approved due to sponsorship and the promise of work from NPL. But Mr. Gao says that never eventuated. He feels NPL has been dishonest.
It was not actively arranging work for us. After I signed a contract with NPL, I had nothing to do for 4 weeks, not a single day of work. So we just slept all day. It didn't give us any work. It's hard to describe how I felt then. We paid so much money, but have no job to do here. Meanwhile, we have our elderly parents and children to support back home. Part of the money I paid Peter Lee was borrowed.
To make matters worse, it's Chinese New Year, when people spend up and clear their debts. But this year, for these men and their families back home, that isn't happening.
I'm the breadwinner of the family. My child just got married. The cost of housing in China is expensive. It's not easy for a common man like me to afford an apartment. I was hoping to earn more money and let my family live a better life. But what we've experienced was nothing like that. I feel very bad. I've been to Singapore and South Korea, where things were better. But here in New Zealand, it's just too hard. We've been cheated.
Mr. Gao now has a new place of work sourced by NPL. He works about 50 hours a week but is only paid $20 an hour for his specialist trade. He's hoping the new employer can sponsor him for his new visa. Xu Xingtian is staying at the same place as Mr. Gao. There's 9 men cramped on mattresses in the Green Lane house. Fortunately for them, one of the new employers is covering their accommodation fees. Some of them don't have any work at all and are so out of pocket they could never pay.
After we arrived here, we signed 2 more contracts with NPL. The first contract still says we were guaranteed to work 30 hours a week, but when we signed the second contract, it didn't give us a copy. Now they are saying we will work an average of 30 hours a week over 10 weeks. We had agreed to be paid for the promised hours, even if we didn't have work. But while some workers got that compensation, I didn't.
Mr. Xu says he has a 3-year visa, but it will take at least a year and a half to earn back the money he paid to Peter Lee.
We need the 30 hours pay to guarantee our livelihood. We have to pay rent and we have to eat. These are all expenses.
So who is Peter Lee and what is his connection to NPL? Peter, or Wen Shan Lee, is listed as a co-director of a number of New Zealand registered companies, including NZT Fashions Limited. Another common co-director is Yu Lee, otherwise known as Tanya. After our phone calls went unanswered, RNZ reporter Liu Chen and myself went along to NZT Fashions in the Auckland suburb of Mount Wellington to ask Yu Lee some questions. We just wanted to ask about your companies and Immigration New Zealand and about Wen Shan Lee, about Peter.
No, I don't know him.
You don't know him?
No. Okay.
Oh, but it says that you're also involved with him in one of the companies?
No, he or Lana Tam no here. I don't know any more from him.
Oh, so when did he leave New Zealand?
I don't know.
But you know Peter Lee?
I don't know any more from him.
然后对，那现在的话，您和他之间是没有联系的，也没有听到他关于他的任何消息。
Do you know where Peter Lee is? You don't know where he is. You're saying you don't know, and you're not related to him.
您跟他没有亲属关系，但是您认识他，对吧？
很早以前，我不知道，我也不能回答你的事情，我不知道他有关系。Okay.
The last time she got in touch with Peter Lee is already last year, and she can't tell us when was that. And she has absolutely no contact with Peter Lee now, and she doesn't know where Peter Lee is or what he's up to.
Peter Lee is also the director of another New Zealand company named New Zealand-China Free Trade Association. The only other director inactive since 2013 is NPL director Kevin O'Connor. When our inquiries at NPL were unanswered, we went to find Kevin O'Connor. He wasn't at the company's head office in Albany. We were told there that he would be at the Takanini office. But when we arrived there, we were told he was at home. The workers there ushered us out of the property and locked the gates. We did receive an email from Kevin O'Connor, but he has not yet agreed to an interview. He says that to the best of his knowledge, the New Zealand-China Free Trade Association has never traded. Kevin O'Connor also says that he relinquished his shares in that company back in October. He says that he's never received any money or dividends as a shareholder or during his 3 days as a director. Now, Immigration New Zealand says it can't comment on the matter, but does say that it's fast-tracking the workers' new visas. RNZ understands a single staffer at MBIE is working on their case. RNZ also understands that Peter Lee is under investigation by Immigration New Zealand, which includes the circumstances of NPL's recruitment of the workers. What INZ could say is that in the 2 years after the 2015-2016 financial year, the number of complaints more than doubled to over 3,500. NPL is one of a number of companies with an approval in principle status with INZ, which allows it to recruit overseas workers without having to prove on every occasion that it's first exhausted all avenues for recruitment in New Zealand. The approval is given every 12 months, and the company must meet a number of requirements. May Moncor is an employment law advocate and acts for most of the Chinese workers. She's filed an application with the Employment Relations Authority claiming wages and personal grievance on behalf of the workers. She's just received a statement in reply from NPL's lawyers and says the case is moving towards mediation.
Immigration New Zealand needs to set up a higher standards to make sure the employers who want to bring workers to this country, they must have a sufficient work to provide to those workers. And also we have concerns about Mr. Lee's behavior. And those fees could be regarded as illegal premium. According to Section 12A of the Wage Protection Act,
the Immigration Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway, has previously promised the workers will get new visas, but they say they're still waiting.
I still want to stay in New Zealand and work. I want to earn back what I've paid for the visa. I will work hard. I hope I can work longer here and earn more money for my family and return to China.
Mr. Xu says he hasn't seen or heard of Peter Lee since late last year, but did receive a call from him when Peter Lee became aware that Immigration New Zealand might be investigating him. If Peter Lee pocketed $45,000 from each of the workers, that's $2.25 million.
Alex Perrottet reporting there, as well as Liu Chen, and background work by Jesse Chang, camera work by Claire Easton Farrelly and Nick Monroe. It is about almost 18 minutes past 5, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We are keen for your feedback as always. You can text us on 2101, tweet us, Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But let's head north now to Waitangi. Jacinda Ardern has promised 2019 to be the year of delivery, but made a case today from the Waitangi Treaty grounds that good progress has already been made for Māori. But the Prime Minister conceded that more needs to be done. Protest was minimal at the Upper Marae, where party leaders were welcomed for the traditional pōwhiri, but down at Te Tii Marae it was a different story for former National Party leader Don Brash. Our political reporter Joe Moyer is at Waitangi.
It's been a year to the day since the Prime Minister asked the people of the North to hold her and her government to account. Last year, a hapu Jacinda Ardern made promises to reduce Māori incarceration rates and declared the government should be judged on its actions.
It has been 1 year since I stood on this veranda. It's been 1 year that I talked about the importance of this place to all of Aotearoa. It's been 1 year since I talked about the distance between the two houses. And it's been 1 year since I asked all of you to hold all of us and myself to account.
She's returned to the Waitangi Treaty grounds and reflected on the year that has been, both as a leader and a mum.
The past 12 months have taught me what a journey we have to go on together. But it's also taught me what a privilege this job is. It's taught me the joy of being a mum. This year has taught me that we may make progress on inequality. We may reduce poverty, we may reduce unemployment, education, the prison population, but there will still, for all of that, be distance between these two houses.
But the overwhelming message from Ms Ardern is that while this year is one she has dubbed as the year of delivery, there is still much more to do.
Last year I shared my aspiration that more should have the dignity of work. And in the last 12 months, we have seen unemployment drop. Māori unemployment is the lowest that it has been in a decade, and yet the distance between us is still too high. We have more to do.
While Ms Ardern's daughter, who was here with her in Waitangi, wasn't part of today's pauwhiri, her name, Neve Te Aroha, featured strongly with the choice of waiata led by the Prime Minister.
Te aroha, te whakapono, me te rangi Māori e,
The National Party leader Simon Bridges spoke from the Paipai today, the first time as leader.
The Prime Minister has said that this must be a year of delivery, and I couldn't agree more with that sentiment. It must be a year of delivery for Māori, for all New Zealanders, because korero is good, barbecues are better, and getting hold of some of Shane Jones' funds, that's magic.
He noted he was the first Māori leader of a major political party, a comment which appeared to amuse Winston Peters. Mr Bridges said any future relationship with Māori would be one of partnership.
You know what solutions are best for your hapu, for your iwi, for your whānau, for your communities. And that's why we'll keep working with you on things like whānau ora, on things like partnership schools, on things like Te Ture Whenua Māori land reform.
Asked whether Mr Bridges' comments were an easy dig at the government, this is what Ms Ardern had to say.
Well, actually on charter schools we did quite a significant amount. We've transitioned those schools into a different model. Actually, no, I don't tend to take everything that's said in a pauwhiri personally. And so, no, I'll just take Simon Bridges at his word, and it's an offer that he's chosen to make.
The overall mood here today was warm and united, something that has grown out of the Waitangi organisers' decision to move the day away from the lower marae, Te Tii, and up to the more neutral treaty grounds. While a protester visibly upset about the presence of politicians at Waitangi was moved on just moments after everyone had been seated, the only protest of the morning, the united front from across the political divide was a significant change from years gone by.
That's ultimately been what the organisers have been driving for, and I think it's led to a really positive environment.
Protest was expected at the lower marae, Te Tii, when the former National Party leader Don Brash spoke this afternoon. His comments deriding the value of te reo Māori weren't well received. He was shouted down by protesters led by Dame Whina Cooper's daughter. Tomorrow the Prime Minister and a large contingent of MPs will attend the dawn service at Waitangi before Ms Ardern again dons an apron and tongs to put on a huge barbecue breakfast for the public. After her promise from the marae to deliver much more, her first port of call is ordering in extra sausages to make sure there's enough kai to go around. From Waitangi, for Checkpoint, Joe Moya.
Don Brash has managed to avoid too much disruption at a speech he delivered at Te Tii Marae this afternoon. The former national leader, who now fronts Hobson's pledge, was invited onto the marae to share his thoughts on different rights for Indigenous people. Last time he spoke there in 2004, he was hit in the face with mud by angry protesters. Our reporter Shannon Hanoi Thompson was at the speech and joins me right now. Hi, Shannon.
Kia ora, Lisa.
What did Don Brash outline in his speech exactly?
Well, as Jo had just alluded in her package, he did start his kōrero by talking about the value of te reo Māori, which he actually outlined. He thought there was no value in te reo Māori because the majority of the world speak English. And it was actually at this point when a lot of protesters that had arrived became very vocal, and he actually had to stop his speech. The moderator at the time, Ruben Taipare, calmed everyone down and he started speaking again. After that small break, he came back and he started talking about treaty settlements, saying that only treaty settlements only benefit a small percentage of Māori, and that Māori can't think that they're going to get rich from a treaty settlement. He then also went on to talk about how he thinks the welfare system is actually demeaning to Māori and actually takes away from their mana.
In general, despite that small group of protesters, what was the overall reaction to the things he had to say?
Well, from the moment he started speaking, even though there was a small group of open protesters who arrived with a banner saying no room for racism, there was about 100 people in the political forum tent who came to listen, and quite a few of them started heckling, and quite a few of them were heckling, not necessarily all at once, throughout moments of his speech. So he did quite well. There were hecklers throughout his speech, and he continued on, and I'm not sure, he hasn't actually left the marae yet, and we haven't actually been able to talk to him about how he felt the speech went. After he was sat down, the protesters and other people that wanted a right to reply to what he brought up were given that opportunity.
Shannon, did you hear anything in that speech that we haven't heard from him before?
Oh, well, to be honest, no, not really. It's all stuff that he has said at many different occasions. He had a few supporters of his own there in the tent. There was a few people from Hobson's Pledge. So, and to be fair, it's nothing for me that I haven't heard before
from him. Okay, so what's on the agenda for Waitangi Day tomorrow?
The traditional dawn service will start the morning early, and then, as Jo has said already, we have the barbecue. And down at Te Tii Marae tomorrow, starting off in the political forum tent, is actually Bishop Brian Tamaki, who speaks around 10 o'clock in the morning. Now, he actually arrived not long after, to the marae, not long after Don Brash actually finished his speech. And he arrived, and I would say he roared down the main parade in front of the marae. There was about over 30 big motorbikes that made a lot of revving noises as he arrived to the marae, so you can definitely hear that he arrived. And after that, they parked up their bikes and he went through the official pōwhiri process down at Te Tii Marae.
But making his presence felt there. Thanks, Shannon. Appreciate your time. Shannon Hanoi Thompson, who was in Waitangi there, describing how Bishop Brian Tamaki, announced his arrival on the back of motorbikes roaring into Waitangi. A large bushfire is burning near Nelson, with locals fearing for their homes in tinder-dry conditions. Fire and Emergency received reports of smoke at 2:15 this afternoon on Pigeon Valley Road, west of Wakefield. A spokesperson says 3 helicopters and crews from Wakefield, Nelson, Appleby, Tasman and Brightwater are on the scene. Kayla Lynette Jackson works at the Wakefield Bakery, not far from where the fire is burning. She spoke to our reporter Nita Blake-Person a short time ago.
From where I am, there's a lot of smoke coming off from the hill about, maybe about a K from where we are.
And what does a lot look like? Does it feel kind of threatening in any way?
Not from where we are, because there's a river in between from where the bakery is to where the fire is, but the fire's getting near on my house.
So how close is it to your place?
Well, I live at the hill that it's right. I live at the foot of the hill that it's right behind, so it's getting pretty close.
Are you worried about it?
Yeah, a little bit, because there's been word going around that the fire services are thinking about evacuating.
Who's at home now, and are there lots of people around there who'd need to be evacuated?
There's quite a few houses up that valley. I've got my sister at home, and then my partner's shot up home to be with my sister. And my dad works for Waimea Contracting, and he's on standby in case they need to take equipment or water tankers up there for them.
And what would be under threat from that fire? Is there a lot of stock and things as well as houses?
Yeah, well, because it's a valley, there's a lot of farms up there as well. So we've got about 2 big horse farms, plus there's a deer farm, plus most properties up there have some kind of livestock.
And what are the conditions like there today?
Quite windy, which isn't helping at all.
Pretty dry down there for a while too?
Yeah, we haven't had any rain since December.
And that was Kayla Lynette Jackson, who was speaking to our reporter Nita Blake-Person. A police spokesperson says staff are on standby in case any evacuations are needed. Up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, we're heading back to Waitangi, where there's high-level support for banning a controversial activist. And cyclists in Wellington say they're fighting for space with buses on the roads, saying it's too close for comfort. Do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. You can text us on 2101 and can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let us know what you think about what's going on at Waitangi, anything you've heard on the program, whatever's on your mind. But first, here's Paul with the headlines.
Good afternoon. People living near a large bushfire in the Nelson region are being warned to be prepared to leave for their own safety. Fire and emergency have been battling the blaze since just after 2 o'clock on Pigeon Valley Road west of Wakefield. Park manager of Higgins Heritage Park on Pigeons Valley Road, Alan Palmer, says he's not far from the fire and he's worried about the wind.
There's southwesterly wind behind it. There's a lot of trees ahead of it, so it doesn't look too good. And we are so very, very dry. It's the driest we've known for many years in the Waimeas.
Palmer. The son of a Taranaki grandfather shot dead on his own property wants answers from police about why his killer was allowed to keep his firearms. 78-year-old Morris Riddle was shot a year ago in a dispute about overdue rent. His killer, 69-year-old Colin James Thompson, was today sent to prison for at least 13 years. Mr. Riddle's youngest son says Thompson had a history of threatening his grandfather and the police had opportunities to remove his firearms before the shooting. The political debate has wrapped up at Waitangi with minimal protest and a united front from MPs across the political spectrum. The leaders of every political party had the opportunity to speak directly to the people of the North at the treaty grounds today. The Prime Minister spoke from the veranda of the marae, where 1 year ago she asked to be held to account. Jacinda Ardern said while the number of Māori going to prison has gone down and the number employed has gone up, there's much more to be done. 7 people are reported to have died in a building fire in Paris. The fire broke out in an 8-storey building in an upmarket area of the city. Building occupants scrambled onto nearby roofs to escape the smoke and flames and needed to be rescued by fire crews. 2 bodies have been found in the floodwaters in the sodden northern Queensland city of Townsville. The police had been searching for 2 men in their 20s after concerns that they'd been swept away. The city's in the grip of what's been described as a 1 in 100-year deluge, which has flooded thousands of homes. And that's the news.
And thanks, Paul. We'll turn now to the business news with Nona Pelsier. Nona, the Australian Royal Commission report, this is the one that came out last night on the financial sector, a weighty report. The stock market seems to have breathed a sigh of relief today.
Yes.
Why is that?
Because the recommendations mostly deal with culture, conduct of the banks, their sales practices, the way they interact with consumers, less so with the structure of the banks themselves, which would have been a much more serious thing for the banks to deal with if they had to have revamped their structure, changed things up, sold some pieces, goodness knows, anything to do with dismantling would have been a real dark day for investors. So investors were bracing themselves for something like that. It didn't eventuate, and as a result, the share market reflected the relief that investors were feeling over that.
That's interesting, given that most people regard that report as a real dressing down with a number of recommendations, but not enough to scare the market.
No, well, because the market was, I guess, pricing in the worst case scenario. Yeah. And for brokers who sell bank services, mortgages, and that sort of thing. They are facing an uncertain future because some of the recommendations recommend that they don't get paid some of the fees that they have been paid in the past. So that is a threat to their industry. That's a different story, though. Yeah.
Investment returns on KiwiSaver funds, they've kind of taken a bit of a hit. What's the damage and why?
We've been talking a lot about volatility in the market, and that is that is the reason. We had a big sell down of shares in the last quarter, that's the last 3 months of 2018, which marked down a lot of the value of a lot of big companies that KiwiSaver funds typically are invested in. Not just here in New Zealand, but in Australia, and the Australian market took a huge hit, partly because of the financial sector, which we talked about just now. So in the case of Australia, their share market value fell overall for the year by, let's see, a drop of 2.8% compared with the New Zealand market at 4.9%. So we gained 4.9%. The Australian market went down. So if you were all invested into the New Zealand market, you would have done better if you had had a trans-Tasman exposure there. So overall, New Zealand market is more resilient than the Australian market, but don't forget, of course, the financial services sector took a big hit there.
And anything else exciting happening on the markets today, Nona?
Well, because of this, the New Zealand market, the NZX Top 50 Index, we ended up more than 1%. That's to 94 points, up to 9,074. And that was mostly led by AMP, which had been hard hit previously, Westpac and ANZ, which are dual listed. Just a note there, the ASX 200 was up more than 2%. And our dollar is trading at just under 69 cents. I mean, like just under 69 cents US, 95.1 Australian and 52.9 British pence. And that's it.
Thanks, Nona. That's Nona Peltier with your business update. Let's go back to Waitangi now. There's high-level support for banning a controversial activist from the treaty grounds. Josie Butler, who threw a dildo at Stephen Joyce at the 2016 commemorations, has been trespassed from the Waitangi estate, despite being an invited speaker at the Lower Marae, which is just outside the boundaries of the ban. The CEO of the Waitangi treaty grounds signed off on the order at the request of the police, and the chair of the board, Peter Parauni, says he supports that decision. A smiling Josie Butler stands just steps from the golden sands and glistening waters of Te Tii Bay, just over the road from the marae. In the photo over her right shoulder is the Waitangi Bridge. But instead of providing a link to the treaty grounds, for Josie, it's an impassable divide. The trespass order she's clutching means crossing it could get her arrested.
It still feels like a bit of a kick in the teeth, particularly when other people such as Don Brash and Brian Tamaki are more than welcome to be up there. I am a bit hurt when I'm tangata whenua that I could be trespassed. From my understanding, it has been at the request of the police, so acting on behalf of the Crown. So yeah, just kind of shows where our race relations are at the moment, I think. Not even a conversation has been had with me about that, and yeah, I think that's often where things are at. We're not allowed a voice and decisions are often made on behalf of us.
In 2016, Josie Butler infamously flung a giant dildo at then Minister Stephen Joyce in protest over the TPP trade deal. He literally took it on the chin outside the hotel within the Waitangi estate. Josie was never charged over the incident, but is now banned from the grounds altogether. The trespass notice handed to her by police was signed off by the Chief Executive of the Waitangi Treaty Grounds, Greg McManus. Here's Peter Parauni, Board Chair for Waitangi Limited.
He was requested by the police to do so.
And just signed it because the police asked him?
Yes.
Why?
Oh, because apparently there was indication that she would be causing some trouble, and that was the opinion of the police, and so they asked our CEO if he would issue a trespass notice, which he has.
What evidence was produced that she was planning trouble this year?
I don't know. I haven't got the details on that, but we just have to accept police advice on it, and so we've done that.
Yesterday, we called Greg McManus, the man who signed off on the trespass order, but after a short conversation with our producer, he hung up. We want to know what information the police gave him before he rubber-stamped the order. Today, we couldn't reach him. Josie Butler's adamant she comes in peace and only planned to speak at the Lower Marae and attend the dawn service on Waitangi grounds.
I recently found out that I whakapapa back here, so I came up here to explore and just learn a bit more about that whakapapa and honour it by attending today.
Despite a rich protest history at Waitangi, the Trust hasn't trespassed anyone else from this year's commemorations. Just Josie. So that was in 2016, the incident that she was involved in. I mean, how long do you have to stay away? Does that mean her record's blemished for how long, Peter? When do you think is fair to let her back onto the grounds?
Of course, if it shouldn't be for life, but again, I'm not quite sure, Lisa, just exactly what information the police had in terms of what she may have planned to do.
She is Ngāpui and she whakapapas back to the area. She wants to go to the treaty grounds. She feels she's been kept from that. Do you have any sympathy for that view?
Well, if she feels that connection with the grounds, I can sympathise with her. But is it important for her to make an issue of not being able to come on Waitangi Day, and you've got 360 odd other days to come to Waitangi?
It feels a bit strange to be a threat to national security, and I certainly don't feel that way. I guess it's quite nice that I'm the worst thing the government's got to worry about.
Waitangi Limited Chair Peter Parauni says any rethink of the trespass order is entirely up to Chief Executive Greg McManus. Now, Checkpoint wanted to speak to the police about why they initiated the trespass order on Josie Butler. We were told Northland District Commander Superintendent Tony Hill was not available for an interview about this matter, but in a statement says the trespass notice was issued in relation to previous assaultive behaviour towards a VIP in 2016. One of the country's most famous motorcycle meets, the Burt Munro Challenge, will get underway this week in Invercargill. But local Chris Booth, one of the country's biggest motorcycle fans, will not be taking part. The 53-year-old can barely walk. He struggles to use his hands and literally feels his nerves deteriorating each day. A motorcycle engineer for more than 30 years, he has the rarely known and under-recognised hand-arm vibration syndrome, an occupational disease that's caused by the consistent use of hand vibration tools. He says his condition was made worse by a lack of understanding by ACC, and he's demanding it reassess his care. Our South Island video journalist Logan Church visited Chris Booth in his Invercargill home.
My cousins used to come home on their Kawasaki triple two-strokes, and just hearing those roaring up the drive at my auntie's place, I was always the first one up to the window.
Motorcycle-obsessed Chris Booth made and repaired bikes and sidecars for 3 decades. But it was his love of the machines that led to his crippling condition, hand-arm vibration syndrome. The symptoms first started to appear 12 years ago, when he was at work in a garage in Hawke's Bay.
I noticed that I went to work one morning and started doing a job, and about halfway through the morning, just before smoko, my hands swelled up like a couple of boxing gloves, and I couldn't move my wrists.
Mr Booth originally made an ACC claim in 2007 for carpal tunnel syndrome, after advice from a GP. That was denied, thus starting a long process of visiting specialists who, to cut a long story short, struggled to reach a diagnosis.
There are no testing facilities here in New Zealand. Not one doctor that I've been to in this country has even heard of the disease.
How many doctors have you been to?
Oh, I'd hate to guess, but I'd say probably over 30.
A specialist in hand-arm vibration syndrome, originally from the UK, Dr David McBride, eventually diagnosed Mr Booth with the syndrome in 2010. ACC accepted his claim for it that same year, and he had a second claim of deterioration accepted in 2016 after it went to review. But his condition keeps deteriorating. Now using a wheelchair, Mr Booth says he is in constant agonising pain. Simple tasks like making a phone call or taking a shower are excruciating. Mr Booth asked me to film the process he has to go through to have a shower. It took about 45 minutes.
For those who aren't watching, he is sitting beside the shower trying to dry himself. He is shaking, but that is not from the cold, it's a hot day. It's from the pain.
I can't believe I've been left in this state. I honestly can't believe it. Where is the humility in people? Where's the compassion for human life?
Mr Booth holds ACC responsible for his deterioration, saying it tried to rehabilitate him in the same work environments that caused the disease and hasn't done anything to prevent his condition from worsening. He says ACC cut his home help hours in March 2017 when he moved from Christchurch to Invercargill, and his multiple appeals for a review have been ignored. He now receives 2.25 hours of home help a day, but says he needs much more than that.
I've not had an assessment done, an up-to-date assessment, for 2.5 years.
His flatmate Tanya Reid has witnessed her friend go downhill. Acting as a caregiver for Mr Booth, she thinks he desperately needs more home help.
When I met him, he was walking, and then he deteriorated just in his like, with generally with his hand-arm vibration, and then he was on sticks, you know, like having to drag his legs around, and then now a wheelchair, you know, and I'm still getting my head around the fact that actually Chris can't walk anymore, and the 2.25 hours of home care is just absolutely a joke.
Dr David McBride, who we mentioned earlier, is one of the few experts in hand-arm vibration syndrome in this part of the world. I asked him how the disease progresses.
It progresses through a series of stages, and sometimes it progresses in the absence of vibration exposure, and sometimes it doesn't. In severe cases, when there's blunting of the fingers, you can get a serious sort of loss of function in the fingertips. It can progress to gangrene. More usually, the symptoms recover somewhat, but it's a complicated condition. This is the problem.
How disabling can it be?
Well, it can be disabling.
He says it's a serious problem that there is very little research in New Zealand on hand-arm vibration syndrome, and no local testing facilities. And he says that can complicate things for agencies like ACC, which rely on research and medical documentation.
It leaves them in a bit of a limbo because the diagnosis of hand-arm vibration syndrome in the UK certainly is it's quite a complex process. You need a special laboratory for doing it.
But where does that leave Mr Booth and his plea for more home support from ACC? Last week, Mr Booth received an email from ACC which says he'd need another DHB assessment in order to pick up any further hours. But there currently isn't any medical information to support his needs are injury-related. I spoke to ACC's Chief Operating Officer, Mike Tully, about his case. Mr Tully says ACC is not sure Mr Booth's deterioration is related to hand-arm vibration syndrome or HAVS.
The diagnosis of HAVS clear, and so we cover him for that and for the treatment and everything for HAVS. But what's less clear is what's causing his recent decline, which involves the symptoms that are not typically associated with that. So to get to the bottom of that, for Mr Booth, we need to have an appropriate clinical specialist to inform us as to what that looks like.
He says Mr Booth has also missed a meeting with ACC specialists, and that has delayed help, but acknowledges the relationship between ACC and Mr Booth is not ideal.
It's tough when there are relationship challenges, and asking clients to attend various appointments and assessments are important, to get an outcome, and we would just encourage that happens, and that sort of makes life a lot easier for everybody. Understanding the frustration that clearly he's going through. No one's doubting that he's not feeling it, he's not ill, but we just have to try and get the right assessment to find the right pathway forward.
And Mr Tully defended ACC's attempts to rehabilitate Mr Booth in his then working environment.
He developed the HAVS in 2007, and he'd started his own motorcycle business after that, so in fact his repair business in 2011, to which we were able to support him. So again, we helped him with that computer studies to help him with the administration work. He was medically cleared to run the business, but he wasn't to work as a mechanic. We also purchased some specialist equipment to help minimise the vibration in situations where Mr Booth wanted to use the tools himself. I'm aware that Mr Booth feels we should be providing with more support. We're trying to help him with his injury-related needs, but his medical condition is what's perplexing.
But on the issue of home help hours, Mr Tully says an assessment made by a specialist when Mr Booth moved to Invercargill recommended only 1 hour per week. But ACC compromised with the 15.5 hours, which was recommended by his then GP. Mr Tully says ACC plans for 2 specialists, including Dr David McBride, to meet with Mr Booth next month to discuss his current condition and need for more home help. He also says ACC doesn't know how many people have hand-arm vibration syndrome or how many claims it's accepted for the disease. But in the meantime, Mr Booth says he's deteriorating so fast he feels like a ticking time bomb.
I don't have a life. I don't have any independence. I've been imprisoned in my own home now for 6 months.
But he lives in hope one day things will change. He just desperately needs that time to be now. In Invercargill for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
And if you're listening to that story, you can watch it online. It'll be up there shortly. And do let us know what you think. Is Chris Booth getting a fair deal from ACC? Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or 2101 on the text. A 15-year-old boy has been sentenced to life in prison for the brutal murder of a homeless man last year. Hami Hanara, who was 14 years old and on bail at the time of the attack, stabbed 40-year-old Kelly Donna 4 times after getting into a fight over a torch. Our Hawke's Bay reporter Anusha Bradley was at the High Court in Napier and filed this report.
Hami Hanara, I hereby sentence you to life imprisonment on the charge of murder. There will be an order for a minimum period of imprisonment of 10 years.
Hanara stabbed Kelly Donna after he and 4 other teens got into a fight with him over a torch they'd borrowed. But CCTV footage from that fateful night in March showed Mr Donna walking away from them just moments before he was stabbed. Hanara's lawyer, Eric Forster, argued that his client should not be handed a life sentence because of his mental impairments and difficult upbringing.
A finite sentence of imprisonment ought to be imposed here rather than making the defendant a lifer. In my submission, diminished intellectual capacity is important. We have the findings here of alcohol neurodevelopment disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity and intellectual disability.
Crown Prosecutor Steve Manning said mental impairments caused by drugs and alcohol and difficult family backgrounds were sadly so common it should not be taken into account.
This is the 4th teenager to be sentenced for murder in the Napier District Court in the last 12 months. The preceding 3, sir, were aged 19, 17 and 17 respectively, and they had much in common with this defendant. They came from the same area, they met the same demographic description, they came from what could be described loosely as a family with significant parental neglect. All of them, to one extent or another, had mental health issues.
Justice Churchman said life imprisonment was not unjust for what he described was a brutal murder.
And it was only then, when you were not under any threat, that you chose to follow him and stab him 4 times. The number of the wounds, their location being to the neck and the chest, and the force that you used to inflict them indicates to me that you intended to kill him.
Reading a victim impact statement, Carmen Donna described how her cousin's death had taken its toll on their whānau.
As a whānau, we are devastated by not only what has occurred, but how it occurred. Watching the CCTV footage in court and seeing Hami sneaking out behind Kelly and knowing he stabbed him a number of times and walked away was extremely hard to bear.
Hanara will be 25 years old before he'll even be considered for parole. He was also sentenced to 3 months in jail for a burglary charge, which he'll serve concurrently. In Napier for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
Cyclists in the capital say they are fighting for space with buses on Wellington roads, with reports of near misses and buses passing by a hair width. The Regional Council has received more than 100 complaints about its bus drivers getting too close to cyclists in the past year. Now, a cycling advocacy group wants a law change to make it illegal for motorists to come within a metre of cyclists when passing. Our reporter, Mediana Johnson, has the details.
Robert Fides makes the 40-kilometre journey from Wainuiomata to Wellington each day to work along the Hutt Valley Cycleway. 2 weeks ago, he almost didn't make it home.
One of those transit buses came straight out and didn't even look to see if I was coming along the cycleway. And I had about 2 metres before I could have hit him. He just kept on going. I thought it was the end of it, really.
His story is a common one. Wellington's transport operator Metlink received 103 complaints of buses getting too close to cyclists over the past 12 months. Greater Wellington Regional Councillor Roger Blakely says he's seen proof of just how bad it can be.
So I've seen a number of complaints on Twitter and Facebook, including videos which are pretty scary in terms of how close buses sometimes get to the cyclists. And that's really dangerous.
Cycling Action Network's Patrick Morgan says most bus drivers are good at keeping their distance, but they are being let down by a few.
We've got new drivers, new buses, new routes and new timetables. And I think that's really adding up to a perfect storm where perhaps some less experienced drivers are not taking the care that they're required to do. And I think the heat is going on Metlink and the bus operators to show how they can mitigate the risk so we can all get home safely.
A cycling safety program, Share the Road, is training commercial drivers to be more aware of cyclists. Metlink says 44 Wellington drivers completed the program in the last year. Richard Barter runs Share the Road, which puts the drivers in the cyclist seat.
We will take a group of drivers along with some qualified cycle skills instructors and take them for a ride out on the road where they experience car doors opening, where they experience traffic passing them, where they experience traffic following them.
An avid cyclist himself, Mr. Barter says he will engage with drivers by waving to them as they approach. He says accidents can be avoided if cyclists communicate more with drivers. But Mr. Morgan doesn't think that goes far enough and wants a law change to strengthen the existing road code advice that motorists not go within a metre of cyclists while passing.
Because there is no safe passing law at the moment, it means that police are really reluctant to take prosecutions. Even when you've got a video showing how close a pass is, police typically don't do much in response to that. We feel that has to change.
Despite his near miss, Robert Fides is still out cycling the Hutt Valley Road every day. He says that at only 14 cents a day, the cost of charging his e-bike, cycling is not only the cheapest way to get around, but the healthiest too. For Checkpoint, ko Miriana Johnson tēnei.
And tomorrow the country marks nearly 180 years since Te Tiriti o Waitangi was signed. But letters from that era show that some issues for Māori remain the same. RNZ got to take a first-hand look at some of the letters that talk about land negotiations and the importance of kōrero with iwi. Our Ethnic Affairs reporter Jessie Chang has the story.
Up the escalators in the Auckland Central Library and tucked away on the second floor are letters dating back to the 19th century. The collection of more than 700 letters written by Māori can also be found on Auckland Council's online archive, Kura. But preserved in folders, Robert Eruera from the Auckland Council carefully slides them out for me to look at. He's a senior curator of Māori heritage, and this is his passion.
They're like a window of time so that you can view the political agendas and the environment of the time. And all of them are in te reo Māori.
I get a rare glimpse at the original copy of one dating back to 1849 from Hone Heke, the first Māori chief to sign the Treaty of Waitangi.
So you got to remember this is 1849, so that's quite early on. So you can see that he was competent in writing.
Born as Heke Pōkai and baptised as Hone Weremu, the chief is infamous for cutting down a British flagpole 4 times. In sophisticated calligraphy, he addresses the letter to all the mene Pākehā and talks about the boundary for settlers, warning of the consequences if it isn't followed.
If not heeded, then this peace with one another will end. I will become stubborn and free a roaring lion to bite the tail of each star. There will be misfortune.
Hone Heke died shortly afterwards, and the early settlers made plans to encroach on the boundary. Robert Eruera shows me a second letter written by Hone Heke's wife, Hariata Rongo, in protest of a town in Manganui.
Kei hea te pai, where is the goodness? Kei hea te kupu whakatupu I tēnei motu. Where is the sacred word of this land? Kei hea te pupuri I te kupu a heke. How are the words of heke being upheld?
Hone Heke and Hariata's wishes were ignored, and the town was eventually built. Nearly 180 years on, Robert Ereera says respect of Māori sovereignty, or rangatiratanga, is still needed.
The political agendas are still the same. They're still ongoing. They're still on the same basis. We've moved on in many ways, but the same point has always been made, is that they have tino rangatiratanga in consultation and that they must communicate with Māori.
An exhibition with 6 of the letters will be on display in mid-March for 2 months. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jesse Chang tēnei.
Time now for some of your feedback. Let's return to an earlier story we had. This is about Josie Butler, who has been trespassed from basically the upper treaty grounds and the Waitangi estate. She's the woman in 2016 who threw a dildo that hit Stephen Joyce in the face. She's been trespassed even though she's a speaker on the lower marae. Not much sympathy for Josie. This person says that Josie Butler was trespassed from the treaty grounds. It is entirely correct that that's happened. She committed an assault on an MP, this person says. Need to remember Josie was never charged with any crime around that. Another person says Josie mentions that she feels aggrieved at being trespassed from the treaty grounds, with Don Brash and Brian Tamaki still having access. They didn't throw anything, this person says.
RNZ News at 6, I'm Paul Brennan. Good evening. Residents in Eves Valley near Wakefield in the Nelson region are being asked to evacuate urgently due to a large scrub fire. Fire and Emergency have been dealing with the fire on Pigeon Valley Road since mid-afternoon. 3 helicopters and several fire crews are battling the blaze. Park manager of Higgins Heritage Park on Pigeons Valley Road, Alan Palmer, says he tried offering assistance.
We have a trailer firefighting outfit, an old orchard sprayer tank with a firefighting pump on it, which I've hooked onto our four-wheel drive tractor here. I actually drove up the road to see whether we could be of any assistance, though I did doubt that, but the police are stopping all the traffic.
Alan Palmer says it's the driest the area has been in years and he's worried a wind change could bring the fire closer to the park. Residents of Eves Valley and the Eves Valley sawmill have been told to leave their homes. Teapot Valley residents are being told to get ready to get out. The flooding in the northern Queensland city of Townsville has now claimed 2 lives. The bodies of 2 men have been found in the floodwaters. The ABC's Tim Swanston reports.
The grim discovery was made this afternoon at suburban Aitken Vale. Authorities are at the scene. Few details are known at this stage, but police had been searching for 2 men in their 20s after an alleged break and enter in the area. The pair was last seen early yesterday, with fears they may have been swept away. Torrential rain in recent days has swamped about 20 suburbs in Townsville, with possibly thousands of properties inundated. Hundreds of people have been evacuated from their homes.
Tim Swanston reporting there. A group of migrant Chinese workers say they have very little to celebrate as Chinese New Year begins today after becoming victims of a scam. The men were recruited last year for construction jobs with guarantees of work, visas and a place to stay. Since their arrival, some haven't had a day's work. Others say they've been made to sign new contracts and all say they've been abandoned by the agent who charged them and disappeared. One of the workers is Gao Tiong. He says he paid $43,000 to come to New Zealand with a promise of work and a 3-year visa. Immigration New Zealand says it's fast-tracking the workers' visa applications. The son of a Taranaki grandfather shot dead on his own property wants answers from police about why his killer was still in possession of firearms. Morris Riddle, who was 78, was shot at close range with a 12-gauge shotgun in a dispute about overdue rent a year ago. 69-year-old Colin James Thompson was today sentenced to a minimum of 13 years jail for the murder. But Mr Riddle's youngest son, Kevin, says Thompson had a long history of making threats against his father and should not have been able to have a gun.
We know mistakes have been made on at least 2 occasions by members of the police, which should have resulted in Colin's firearms being taken from him.
The police say they review all critical incidents to identify if anything can be learned, and this was done in this instance. The Commerce Commission has told the High Court the ticket-selling website Viagogo broke the law by selling tickets to the 2017 British Lions Tour. Last year, the regulator announced it was seeking an injunction against the Switzerland-based website for breaching the Fair Trading Act. It claims Viagogo misrepresents itself as an official seller, makes misleading claims about the availability of tickets, and advertises incorrect prices. In an email presented in court as evidence, the company alerted sellers to the rugby tour and told them it would be a popular event. The Commission's lawyer, Nick Flanagan, said the company broke the law by doing so.
The British and Lions tour was an event subject to the Major Events Management Act, and it was illegal to sell tickets to it above face value. And it's a given that sellers who are purchasing tickets for resale are going to do that.
Nick Flanagan said the rugby union has the exclusive right to sell tickets to rugby games. The US State Department says the US Special Envoy to North Korea is travelling to Pyongyang tomorrow to prepare for the second summit between Donald Trump and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Last year's historic summit in Singapore delivered only a vague commitment by North Korea to work towards the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Mr. Trump is expected to reveal the date and location of the second summit during his State of the Union speech tomorrow. NIWA has launched a public appeal to find the owner of a USB stick discovered in a frozen slab of leopard seal droppings collected from Oreti Beach in Invercargill. The droppings, known as scat, had been in the freezer for a year. The USB stick was found when the NIWA researchers defrosted and sifted the scat. They say the USB is in good condition and contains images of sea lions frolicking at Porpoise Bay in the Catlins. It's 6:05. On to sport now. Recalled White Ferns all-rounder Frankie Mackey says promoting the women's game is the key to its growth and says the double-header T20s against India will probably show more fans just how well they play. The White Ferns and Black Caps both take on the tourists in 3 T20 double-headers starting in Wellington tomorrow. Canterbury captain Mackey says it was evident during the domestic T20 double-headers that many fans hadn't been exposed to the women's game and many pundits were impressed by the ability of women players.
Just the awareness it kind of brought up around women's cricket's been really cool. The amount of people that, even popped into my work, came into the library and said, oh, you're that girl that plays cricket, you're on the TV, oh, you guys are pretty good, we're going to come watch the next game. And those kind of comments around it just shows that we're doing the right thing for women's cricket, that promoting it is what we need because we've got the skills, we've actually got a game that is really good to watch.
Frankie Mackey. After the NRL Integrity Unit was able to view the CCTV footage of Ben Barber's alleged incident involving his partner on Australia Day, CEO Todd Greenberg has reaffirmed he cannot see the sacked Cowboys fullback ever being allowed to play in the competition again. Greenberg says that Barber's deregistration would stand and it was unlikely the former Dally M medal winner would ever again be granted permission to play in the Premiership after the footage showed the North Queensland recruit being involved in a physical altercation. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the final in our BBC series on dementia. What's better, prevention, cure, or checking out before your brain leaves? Kirsten Johnstone has a song crush on the Specials, James Drake and Janet Jacklin, and our economist Brian Easton on the inevitability of another financial crash. Just don't ask him when. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service. This is the up-to-date short forecast, of course, through to midnight tomorrow, Wednesday, Waitangi Day for Northland. Fine apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers. Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taihape mainly fine. A period of afternoon or evening showers tomorrow. Waikato to Taranaki, that includes Taumarunui, fine for the rest of today. Morning cloud and patchy coastal drizzle tomorrow. Then a period of afternoon or evening showers with possible thunderstorms. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine today. Showers developing tomorrow. Whanganui to Wellington, also Waitanapa, Marlborough and Nelson, fine spells, a period of showers tomorrow morning. Bulla to Fiordland, rain spreads north today, clearing from the south this afternoon through to tomorrow morning, then mainly fine. Isolated showers tomorrow afternoon. For Canterbury, high cloud increasing. Scattered rain developing this evening, gradually easing tomorrow but remaining cloudy. Otago and Southland, patchy rain, clearing this afternoon. Fine spells, isolated showers for Southland. For the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, occasional light showers tomorrow. It's approaching 6:08.
Thanks, Paul. You had me at the story about the USB stick and the frozen sea lion poo. Bizarre but fascinating. You're listening to Checkpoint on on RNZ National. It's about 6:08, and I'm Lisa Owen. The Commerce Commission has told the High Court that the controversial ticket reselling website Viagogo broke the law by selling tickets to the 2017 British Lions Tour. Last year, the regulator announced it was taking legal action against the Switzerland-based ticket resale website for breaching the Fair Trading Act. It's claiming Viagogo misrepresents itself as an official seller, makes misleading claims about the availability of tickets and advertises incorrect prices. Our arts and entertainment reporter Katie Scotcher has been covering the case in the High Court in Auckland.
The Commerce Commission's lawyer, Nick Flanagan, told the court the New Zealand Rugby Union has the exclusive right to sell tickets to rugby games. He said it was not a right shared with the controversial ticket reseller Viagogo. In an email presented in court as evidence, the company alerted sellers to the 2017 British and Irish Lions Tour and told them it would be a popular event. Nick Flanagan said the company broke the law by doing so.
The British and Lions Tour was an event subject to the Major Events Management Act, and it was illegal to sell tickets to it above face value. And it's a given that sellers who are purchasing tickets for resale are going to do that, where else why would they bother?
He told the court ticket scalping is a significant issue for New Zealand rugby.
In the week leading into the first test match of the 2018 Steinlager Series, the Auckland Rugby Union informed us that over 300 children's tickets have been purchased by 6 individuals from Qatar and Russia. Hard to imagine there are 300 children on their way from Qatar and Russia.
The Commerce Commission has received more than 400 complaints about Viagogo since the start of 2017. Mr Flanagan told the court it had received more complaints about Viagogo than the next 2 most complained about traders combined.
It's a marketplace that's frequented by scalpers and by fraudsters, and many of the sales tactics it uses are of the high pressure and highly misleading variety. It is in fact the most complained about trader the Commission has ever faced.
The Commerce Commission is seeking an interim injunction to stop the website from committing what it says are further breaches of the Fair Trading Act. And while an attempt to serve the injunction notice was made to the European company, it insisted it had to be served in its jurisdiction, not in New Zealand. Until this morning, Viagogo was not expected to front at the hearing, but its lawyer, Aaron Lloyd, made an unexpected appearance on a Pickwick basis, which means he will assist the court. He fired back at the Commission's claims.
It's easy for the Commission to try and put the boot into my client with comments such as it's a marginal company and the broad allegations that it's a successful business is based on the kinds of things that the Commission are complaining about. But the reality is that the matter is a little bit more complex than that. Viagogo has been around for over a decade.
Among other allegations, the Commerce Commission said the website misleads customers over its ticket guarantees. Its lawyers told the court as a ticket reseller, it cannot guarantee tickets will be valid. Aaron Lloyd defended Viagogo's policy and made an analogy to a toaster.
My friend seems to think that the guarantee is somehow amounting to an utter and absolute assurance that a ticket will be available. When I buy a toaster, I get a guarantee it's going to work too, but occasionally it fails. No one thinks that a guarantee is necessarily an absolute and utter promise. And in fact, as my friend indicated into the terms and conditions on the Viagogo website, you see that the guarantee is a guarantee that says this will happen and if it doesn't, you will get money back.
Justice Patricia Courtney has reserved her decision. I tamaki makoto moti hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scotcher aho.
A large scrub fire that's burning near Nelson has forced people living in Eves Valley and the Eves Valley sawmill out of their homes this evening. The fire broke out mid-afternoon in Pigeon Valley near Nelson. It's now 120 hectares in size and is growing in hot and dry conditions. We've got the Deputy Mayor, Tasman Mayor Tim King on the line. He lives in the area. Hi Tim, what's happened in your situation?
Well, over the course of the afternoon, it's I guess the fire's got progressively closer, and so we've been advised by the police that we should leave. So we spent the last hour kind of packing stuff up and grabbing valuables, and we're about to leave for the night, I guess.
There's a bit of wind there, Tim, so if I can get you to just hold the phone up to a bit closer, I imagine that's not helping the situation, the wind. So you got about an hour's notice, did you?
Yeah, well, it's been burning for a few hours this afternoon, but the police came up about an hour ago, so they've suggested we should leave, yes.
And what have you been able to grab? What are you doing right now?
Oh, it's been, look, all these situations, one of the great things about it is you suddenly get lots of people who you know ring up and offer their assistance. And lots of friends have come up and grabbed farm gear and valuables from the house and kind of the irreplaceable stuff that I guess most people would grab. And now we're heading out.
So can you see the fire? Can you see flames, or what can you see from where you are?
I can't. So from where I am, all I can see is a great big black or grey-black pile of smoke blowing directly over the top of our property. So no flames at this point, so that's a good sign.
Can you tell how close it is?
I know roughly how close it is. It's it's still a reasonable distance away, but the wind's blowing, and I've been involved in rural fire over the last 20 years, so I know these things can change in a rush. So when someone says you need to leave, you need to leave.
So do you know how many residents or how far this evacuation is spread?
No, look, I'm just focused on myself and my family at the moment. I presume there's only half a dozen residents in East Valley, but where the Teapot Valley and other valleys close to us have also been evacuated, I presume they might have been. But no, look, I'm just focusing on ourselves at the moment, I'm afraid.
So how many in your family? Any pets? Where are you going?
Oh, yeah, no, so, yeah, we've got the dogs loaded up. Calves been shifted to hopefully as safe a place as possible. And, yeah, all the stock, etc. We just have to leave, really. There's not much we can do about that.
So did I hear you say, sorry, the line is a bit difficult, a calf that you've moved?
Oh, yeah, we got, pet calves, so my son's pet calves, so he's been hand-rearing them, so we've moved those to what we hope will be a safe place, and I guess we'll see in due course.
So where are you going? Where are you going to spend the night?
Oh, look, we are heaps of family friends have offered us places to stay, so like I say, these sort of situations always bring the best out in people, and so, look, we've been overwhelmed by offers of help in the last couple of hours, so no, it won't be a problem finding somewhere to stay tonight.
OK, best of luck. That is Tim King, who lives in the area and is also the Deputy Mayor with the Tasman Council there. He and other people are evacuated. He's got his dogs and his family in the car about to go. Some stock they're having to leave behind, though. A court has heard how the killer of a Taranaki grandfather cried out he'd got what he deserved and kicked him while he lay dying. 78-year-old Maurice John Riddle was shot on his farm near Normanby in February last year after going to pick up overdue rent. Our reporter Robin Martin was in the High Court at New Plymouth for his killer's sentencing.
Colin James Thompson, a 69-year-old who had a history of animosity with Mr Riddle, had rented a cottage from the farmer for about 20 years. Crown Prosecutor Sherry Clark said Thompson had stashed a 12-gauge shotgun before inviting Mr Riddle over to pick up the overdue rent. Ms Clark said Mr Riddle's murder was a callous execution-style killing.
This was a cold-blooded execution of Mr Maurice Riddle, and it was highly, in the Crown's submission, premeditated. It was a calculated and planned killing.
In sentencing, Justice Robert Dobson laid out the chilling details of Mr Riddle's last moments. Justice Dobson explained that after collecting the rent, Mr Riddle went to leave.
As he began walking away from the house, you went inside, retrieved a loaded 12-gauge shotgun and challenged Mr Riddle whilst armed with it. It appears there was a further exchange, and with the two of you standing only metres apart, with Mr Riddle facing you, you fired a single cartridge from the shotgun, which caused wounds to Mr Riddle's lower abdomen and to his hands. He immediately fell to the ground, critically injured.
Justice Dobson said associates of Thompson, who had been warned of a possible confrontation, went to Mr Riddle's aid.
You called out to him that Mr Riddle had got what he deserved and that they should let him die. You then walked up to where Mr Riddle was lying, kicked him hard in the hip area, swore at him, saying that he had got what he deserved.
Mr Riddle died at the scene. Justice Dobson said Thompson had a history of threatening Mr Riddle and in the week prior to the attack had told an associate he was going to shoot the mongrel.
The shooting has to be seen as the tragic culmination of a long-expressed intention to kill Mr. Riddle. It was certainly not on the spur of the moment, and I accept that the Crown is entitled to describe it as a cold-blooded execution for which you showed no remorse by your comments and conduct immediately after the shooting.
Thompson had only been deemed fit to face charges late last year after his poor mental state had delayed proceedings. His counsel, Paul Keegan, said his client had now reflected on what he had done and was deeply sorry. Mr. Keegan said Thompson had struggled with his wife's death 3 months prior to the killing and was suffering from depression.
The defendant's wife was his rock and his world. The defendant loved her very much, and in the wake of her death, he fell apart. He lost control of his finances and he deteriorated mentally.
Earlier, the court had heard several victim impact statements from Mr. Riddle's family. His son Craig said that his murder had robbed him of the chance to reconcile with his father, from whom he was estranged.
I have been robbed of my father, and my children have lost their gracious and loving grandfather. Nobody deserves to be shot in cold blood and for so little cause.
Outside court, Mr. Riddle's younger son Kevin thanked the emergency services who attended to his father and the Crown for taking the prosecution. But Kevin Riddle questioned the police's response to earlier complaints about Thompson's behaviour.
We know mistakes have been made on at least 2 occasions by members of the police, which should have resulted in Colin's firearms being taken from him. We see this totally unacceptable, but we want to reiterate we are not on a witch hunt. We just want to ensure changes are made to prevent this from happening again.
Kevin Riddle wants any potential internal police investigation into the case to be given priority. In a statement, the police say they review all critical incidents to identify if anything can be learned, and this was done in this instance. They do not believe an independent Police Conduct Authority investigation has been launched. Justice Dobson took into account Thompson's clean record, guilty plea and his mild depressive state before sentencing him to life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 13 years and 2 months. I ngā mutu mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Robin Martinaho.
Tow bar makers are warning if the Transport Agency fails to compensate people caught out by its latest safety inspection failure, it will set a precedent for passing costs on to motorists. 3 Auckland manufacturers have joined together and, with the backing of dozens of small businesses, are intent on forcing the agency to pay up. Phil Pennington reports.
Aro Brothers, Counties Commercial and Acker Built have between them made 1,000 tow bars. All of these lost their safety certifications just before Christmas under a Transport Agency safety alert, and many remain uncertified and illegal to use. Jeremy Moore of Acker Built says their customers are hurting, but the bureaucrats don't care, as evidenced by the agency writing to his firm just once.
They've obviously just thought, oh, we don't want to pay for it, and hopefully if we just let this one slip by, no one will do anything and people will pay for it themselves. But we know that if we allow it to happen, that there's more to come, basically.
Recertifications cost $400 or so and upwards. Mr Moore accuses officials of being blasé, pointing out the safety alert was issued in December, more than 2 months after the certifying engineer was suspended, and that even since the alert, there's been a time lag.
The one email correspondence we had actually stated that all the customers had finished being spoken to. That's completely incorrect. Most people are only finding out in the last week or 2.
The 3 companies are waiting for the agency's response to their open letter, demanding that it pay instead of them or their hundreds of customers. The agency has previously paid up to recertify thousands of truck towing connections in the South Island mostly, and for rechecking thousands of warrants of fitness for cars issued by suspended garages. Rebecca Hadley of Dingo Groundworks in Auckland has 3 trucks she can't use to tow diggers, half her fleet, and says the costs are mounting.
Oh God, to be honest, I don't think I'd want to do the sums because it'd be enough to make me cry. Not to mention it's all the cost as well of trying to ring around and finding a certifier to recertify them, and they seem to be few and far between.
Worse still, she got a confusing message from the agency that the tie-downs on her trucks also need recertifying, but she can't confirm it. Blair Johnson has 15 motorhomes sold by his company Jayco Auckland, caught up in the revocations, and he has unhappy customers on the phone.
It's caused them a great deal of distress when they were notified of the problems. Many of them were on holiday. They were towing boats, towing smaller vehicles, and were really concerned as to how they would actually get home, knowing that their vehicle was now illegal. It's quite concerning that their key focus was on safety, yet some people were notified before Christmas, some are still being notified now. You do have to wonder if it was a serious issue, why they didn't act quicker.
Blair Johnson believes the Transport Agency's failure to pay to cover its own auditing laxness amounts to preying on retired people just because they don't use their motorhome for business. Jeremy Moore of Acker Built says the tow bar maker's next step, if the agency won't pay, is to pursue a claim against the insurer of the certifying engineer covering all 1,000 tow bars as a group. Individual claims would founder on the $5,000 excess. The Transport Agency says it's considering the tow bar maker's letter. It says safety is a top priority and it knows the revocations will unfortunately impact on some businesses and individuals. Figures newly released by the agency to RNZ show it cut its compliance workforce from 54 in 2010 to just 28 last year, including laying off 5 such staff in 2015 alone. The agency is now hiring a whole lot back to enforce the rules. For Checkpoint, Phil Pennington.
Martinborough residents will need to keep boiling their water for a few more days yet, but the local council is confident it will soon be back to its normal, safe state. Fresh water was trucked into the town last week after E. coli was detected in one of the water sources. Yesterday, the South Waitangi Council flushed chlorine through the system to kill the contamination that's been causing nightmares for locals. Ben Strang reports.
For the village cafe in the heart of Martinborough, the contamination has affected almost every part of the business. The owner, Bruce Lawrence, says when they were first notified on Friday, they had already done all their prep, so that meant ditching hundreds of dollars worth of washed salad vegetables. Hand sanitizer had sold out in the town, and there were many more logistics to sort out.
And like everything out of the dishwasher we had to rinse because the dishwasher only heats 85 degrees, doesn't heat to 100. The coffee machine only heats to 85 or 95 at the most, so we had to get a siphon system set up with fresh water.
Dudley Ann Hill, who runs the neighbourhood and Knucklebone cafes, says it put a lot of pressure on cafes and restaurants on the busiest weekend of the year, the Martinborough Fair. She says it was a massive inconvenience.
Our coffee machine is plumbed in, so we've got two coffee shops, 2 coffee machines, and we normally hook up another 2, so it was 4 coffee machines we had to then, supply water, clean filtered water for. So Friday we headed out of town, bought bottled water for 4 customers and a dozen 15-litre bottles to filter through our coffee machines.
Yesterday, the South Waitangi District Council flushed chlorine through the system to try to solve the problem. It will now need to record 3 clear days in a row before the boil water notice can be lifted. The council's infrastructure services manager, Mark Allingham, says chlorinating Martinborough's water usually leaves it a bluey-black colour because of a chemical reaction.
Manganese. So we have manganese in the Martinborough water supply. When it is mixed with chlorine, it goes a blue-black colour, which is safe to drink but aesthetically unpalatable.
Mr Allingham says the manganese levels were low yesterday, meaning there was little discoloration to the water. He says the council will look later this year at whether to chlorinate full-time, but that would mean removing the manganese from the bore because people don't want to drink discoloured water. For Checkpoint, Ben Strang.
In the US, the governor of Virginia is under increasing pressure to resign over a racist yearbook photo from the 1980s. Ralph Northam met with his cabinet and other top officials today in a bid to manage the fallout. The photo shows one person with a black face and another in a KKK hood. As the CBC's Paul Hunter reports, the governor has come up with several different explanations for the picture.
Stand up. Outside the Virginia State House today, demands for Democrat Ralph Northam to step aside as governor of Virginia. In the crowd, placards that read, "No place for blackface." In the nearby State House, House Speaker Kirk Cox.
We have called for the resignation. We hope that's what the governor does.
I think that would obviously be less pain for everyone.
The pain is all about that photo from Governor Northam's medical school yearbook in 1984 on a page in part dedicated to him with 3 pictures of Northam and another one in that same section with 2 people, one in blackface, the other in a Ku Klux Klan robe and white hood.
Good afternoon.
When the photo emerged last week, Northam acknowledged one of those 2 was indeed him, but then the next day, a reversal.
I'm telling the truth today, that was not my picture.
Northam then added a postscript. He said he has dressed in blackface before, just not that time in the yearbook photo.
That same year, I did participate in a dance contest in San Antonio, in which I darkened my face as part of a Michael Jackson costume.
Something he said he now regrets, but that his vivid recollection of that is why he can say the other photo is not him, because if it was, he'd surely remember. And as it turns out, his Michael Jackson blackface memory is quite vivid.
And I used just a little bit of shoe polish to put under on my cheeks. And the reason I used a very little bit is because I don't know if anybody's ever tried that, but you cannot get shoe polish off.
All of it underlining that this remains a country still struggling on the matter of race. It's Virginia, where 2 summers ago, white nationalists marched in Charlottesville in the protest that left 1 woman dead, and Donald Trump describing some of those white nationalists as fine people. Just last month, Florida's Republican Secretary of State resigned after a photo emerged of him in blackface dressed as a survivor of Hurricane Katrina. And in that old yearbook with Virginia's governor on another page, 3 other young men in blackface dressed as the Supremes, smiling and dancing and posing for pictures.
And that was the CBC's Paul Hunter. That's it for Checkpoint this evening. We're off tomorrow. It's Waitangi Day. Just to remind you, we'll have a special Waitangi Day broadcast 8 a.m. till midday. That's with Mihinarangi Forbes and Colin Peacock. Do tune in. We will be back on Thursday. If you're celebrating Chinese New Year, have a great evening. That's us.
This is RNZ National. We'll bring you the headlines in just a moment.
RNZ National, with a fresh take on the day's news at 10 every weeknight with Karen Hay.
They put young people into training, they put them into work.
Including the latest national and international news from the RNZ News team.
A group of kaihoyo paddlers burst into haka.
And always live when and where we need to be.
Today, Wellington-based author Mandy Haga is the winner of the 2019 Storylines Margaret Mahi Award for Lifetime Achievement.
In-depth news on Lately with Karen Hay from 10 every weeknight on RNZ National.
Now we have our headlines at just after 6:30 here on RNZ National. People living near a large bushfire south of Nelson have been told to evacuate for their own safety. The fire is now burning through 20